Welcome. This is Fear Talk number 12. Believe it or not, my guest today was number one in the Fear Talk series 2 years and about 5 months ago.
Wow. I haven't been called number one in a long time.
You haven't been number one, but I'll tell you, that was 2.5 years ago. A lot of things have happened in the world since we passed our waves, right? Big things, uprisings, more advancement in the challenges to Mother Earth and the suffering of many, many, many beings and environments. So today we wanted to just explore many things, but I'm just going, before we do that, I'm going to ask you to do an opening for us for I want to just say a little bit about dialogue and the idea of it. Certainly there's ideas of conversation that a lot of people are having. Podcasters, for example, are coming out, a dime a dozen every minute. A new podcaster is coming onto the scene. And these are teachers of all kinds in their own kind of way. But mostly what they're doing is putting out a lot of opinions, collecting expertise, or just having conversations that stir up people's emotions because you get the most hits. The more emotional it is, the more divisive it is. The research shows you'll get more viewers lasting, and therefore more advertising dollars and more power and knowledge that goes with that power. So we're in a very weird sphere. When I started Fear Talks, I wanted to not become part of that sphere of how to get more hits, how to get more publicity, and actually see if we can create these short little videos that people could look at to see in what I call an authentic conversation, that I would actually prefer to call a dialogue. Therefore, it's not an argument, right? It's not a positioning per se, even though there can be strong statements, claims, passion shown, even conflict tensions. But never am I interested to end up in a conversation with someone in a Fear Talk where we end up sort of saying, well, we'll just have to agree to disagree, or even agree. I'm actually not interested in either of those, because I think what humans need to see modeled, and this is the educator in me, and I know you're an educator too, Four Arrows, is I want to see people see a model of two authentic human beings really inquiring, struggling, trying to make sense of the world, trying to make sense of our own development, our own being, and then obviously offering what gifts that we can bring through our experience as a gift back to the world, because the world has been so generous to us in many different ways, even though all of us may have different degrees of privilege, access, capability. So Fear Talks ultimately is a place to talk about fear. As I said to you 2.5 years ago in Fear Talk 1, where can you go to see people really talk about fear in a deep, authentic, slow-mannered, intense, informing way, without it being about trying to make some big position or coerce people to change, coerce each other to change, but actually offers a flow for the possibility of transformation that neither you nor I may even expect might come out of this. A very different educational process. So that, my dear friend, is a Fear Talk. I invite and welcome all people viewing today to join us and to enjoy this space that I asked for Arrows, and he'll explain why it's important for him and for me to enter this dialogue in a certain kind of attitude. Go ahead.
Well, Michael, one thing that I think needs to be said is that the dialogue around this topic has increased since you have come on the scene with it, and not just in the last 2.5 years, but even in the groundwork that you did before that. So I thank you for that, and I think that your listeners should know that. And of course, we open conversations, dialogues, traditionally indigenous cultures that still practice these ways, colleges like Sitting Bull, Oglala Lakota College. There's never been a meeting that I ever attended that didn't start with someone offering some words that relate to our reciprocity, our appreciation, our hope for others to be able to find the happiness that they deserve, etc. And all of them also relate to the non-human world as much as to the human world, because we're all related. So if you allow me, I'll just say a brief prayer that does the reflection on those concepts. Tungashi wakantoka namako tetewa topa namushimaka ahitu ayam ke oyate oyasi unshi wichalapo no oichaki po hechu witozani washite unwapite oyate oyasi chanku luta namani oichaki okichi api makio kibieki ihani lokowi joanki tonkashi kisui tahoyasa. So is there anything to be gained by talking about fear, Michael, or is it better to avoid that subject?
We'll talk about it as much as we can. I invite you to a challenge. It's a challenge for me to talk about fear without talking about fear.
There you are. That's
without even using the word, if we can.
Yeah.
And it's fine if it slips in. It's not a competition. I did this with a friend in one of the Fear Talks. She was a clinical psychologist. I knew her quite well, and she knew my work. And I asked her to do this. Well, it was virtually impossible. I think we lasted maybe a minute or two, and she just kept using fear. And I said, "Oh well, how else could we talk about this? Still get to what we want to get to, right? Without actually having to use it." And it was just so fascinating. It was totally frustrating for her as a clinical psychologist, even though she wanted to.
I just did it a few minutes before your call. I was talking with a colleague about our social ecological justice class we're going to teach next month, and you know me, I just wing it. So she was, I think a little frustrated to not know what the plan was. I said, no, let's see who comes up and who shows up. But what I was telling her about, because she was, like many people, having a difficult time with coping with all that's going on, and so I started talking to her. Have you ever kind of looked at creating a death profile, sort of a way of feeling comfortable with your dying and your death, which I believe, if you're like most people, will happen. And I was telling her some ways to do it. That I have my 21-year-old Mayan godson here, and I said this because the water is unbelievably cold out here. I mean, I don't know if you can see here, Michael, but I'm sitting in the kitchen, and here I'll bring you out to just look out the window. So the water out there in the ocean is 72 degrees today. There's a northerly upswell apparently that made that happen. And so, we're used to the warm water. Now that's not cold, right? Really cold, like in San Francisco. But it was, I've been watching people go out on the beach and kind of like, oh, and they slow down and they hesitate. So I said, Pablo, one way you can create this comfortable practice of being ready for your last breath. I said, the water's kind of cold out there. And it was morning, so it was cold in the air. I said, start walking towards the water and begin to think that you're on your proverbial deathbed, or your heart just hit you, or you're dying of some reason, and that instead of hesitating, you are going to sing your death song with a sense of kind of looking forward, if you will, to whatever this mystery that's happening next, from that your soul, your spirit, whatever you want to call it. And so just walking, as soon as you feel the discomfort of the water on your feet and your legs, just keep walking forward, singing your song, right? In your mind. And then just don't stop, just because you can't stop it. Don't try to stop it. Just keep going forward and then plunge in, and then just allow yourself to feel whatever you feel and smile at the last moments of your pretend ending. And do that kind of thing, or invent your own regularly, and see how much more resilient you are in life with various stressors. See how more open you are to criticism, to other ways of knowing and thinking that you can attempt to learn about, to how to let go of hope and without any consequences, right? Okay, so man, that was like 2 minutes, and I never said the F word. Not that F word, but the other
Yeah,
one.
so what I thought immediately, thank you, I like the story. It's reminding me of a few things, but to start with, I've always been interested in your background as an educator and attracted to it as we connected in 2007 or so, on one of your book projects, the Authentic Dissertation book project. Why I think I was particularly attracted as I looked at your background is that you have a background in what I call extremes and emergency, and really challenging conditions, i.e. as a military trained person as well, that war was the actual condition of which you were going to be doing your learning, your training, and even delivering service and leading soldiers, or at least Marines at that time.
Hey, you got to be careful. You got to call them Marines. I'm still
Marines,
brainwashed into
I
that.
know, absolutely. And so you can just hear how I'm framing the way that I see you as coming to education, to change, to transformation, to healing, to, as you experienced and witnessed and helped guided this young person. There's always been in your background this extreme sense. And then there was this really another part of the educator I really am appealing, and a lot of people in my audience won't know that what you and I have very common in background is that we both were involved in fairly significant leadership positions in youth centers for young people who were basically, quote, out of control, had been dumped from the system, rejected more or less, and were trying to be rehabilitated. And I was very interested in that too, as another extreme condition. You walk into one of those facilities, this is a residential program, and I worked for 10 years in one as well, without training and background in how to do this. I just got in through the back road. And when I read your story of some of the incidents you had with those young boys and the staff, and the need to basically, at one level, you're trying to protect everybody and everything from hurting themselves, from getting cold, getting too cold, right? Being frightened, being this or that. And we're trying to control the whole environment, right? To this point where you just know it's going to blow up. You just know it is, and basically wait for it. Just like if you go into war, in a war zone, a conflict zone, you're waiting for it. You know it's going to blow up.
Wow, what an interesting...
Isn't that interesting?
Interesting analogy. I never had thought before about our mutual shared time in those in residential treatment facilities for adjudicated youth or whatever, and so your experience really confirms that when you are in those situations, there's going to be an explosion, there's going to be a violent act. I never thought about that parallel before, but
And
certainly it's there.
So then I like that framing, because now we're in a condition of a world just even, fairly comfortable, privileged people like you and I on a daily basis, as educators, as teachers, leaders, curriculum people, we're an attempt trying to bring education processes and thinking, a new world view to that pedagogy, if you will, or hudagogy or andragogy. We're trying to bring a new frame that basically is saying, be prepared for things to blow up. They will. Whoa, that's very different than manage, how to control, I'm not saying those things aren't necessarily valuable, but if we're not learning to let go of that need to not have things blow up, right? Then,
of course, the management, isn't the management still, or the control is not the best word, but I mean, if you enter into a profession where that's your job is to deal with explosions, there's a couple of ways that you can go with that are good, and a couple of ways you can go with that's not good. So how would you put this in the context of our topic?
Let me ask you, how did you learn that in the military as becoming I think you were a lieutenant commander at one point. You were ready to lead a group of people, of soldiers or Marines.
Yeah, but I would say that they're very different. That our metaphor, I like it in the one sense, but in terms of what I'm bringing up now, I think they're very different, because in the military, you're certainly similarly going into a situation where there are going to be these explosions, let's call them, and acts of violence that you need to deal with, but you're trained in a way to kill them and to do violence back. In the residential treatment programs, it's just the opposite, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. And yet, in the way, we're still trying to bring about something good. Why do we go into those services, right? Because someplace we believe this will be good.
If you were naive like I was early on, you would belive that. I think that there's more of a chance of you believing it in a troubled youth facility.
There is more. I agree. Yeah. So then we also have to deal with staff in these places, right? These youth centers. And I found that actually almost more challenging, because I was a director of therapy at the time. Eventually, I didn't get there right away, but I did eventually, just because I was effective in communicating with the kids. And the staff were the worst problem. And I think I remember that in your story, as I wrote the book on your story. It was the same issues, right? They were wanting this control and this and this and this and protections. And you were, again, as creative individuals, and I think this is the path, that we're interested in, is a path where we are able to let go. This was this word that you talked with Pablo as you walk out to the beach, right? To let go and to be prepared for the blow up, and also be prepared for the risk to your being. And that's because you actually are choosing to be an alive being in the real world of real things happening. Rather than an artificial world.
Let me share real briefly this story so your listeners can kind of see a context with this. Yeah, I did. I wound up firing almost everybody.
I think so. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, my first day officially as the administrator, I had like 70 staff, and only about 20 of them or 29 of them there at one time. And I was in my office when I heard the alarm go off, and I asked my secretary, well, what's that all about? She said, oh, it's runaways. We have them happening all the time. I said, well, what do we do? She said, oh, don't worry about it. They're going to go out into the sugar beet fields, and it's in Idaho, so it's cold. We'll get off-duty personnel to surround the fields, and they'll get cold, and they'll come out and get in one of the cars, and then we bring them back. We put them in a lockup room in a pink or yellow suit, and a suicide room, actually, and we'll watch them. And then they lose all their privileges and da 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 da. It was this whole thing. So I'm thinking, whoa, what did I get myself in for here? And I went to my desk. When I look out the window, with where the sugar beet fields right outside, and I see these two little heads bobbing and running. So I had my horse there at the time. That was one of the privileges I got. And I ran out and jumped on my horse bareback and ran across the highway and into the field and approached the two young children, I think 12 and 13 or something like that. And I said, boys, let's head back. And they said, who are you? I said, well, I'm your new director. I said, let's head back. And anyway, long story short, I asked them, what can you do to make this right? And by the time we got back, between the two of us, we figured that they'd get jobs to pay for the people I had to send out with minimum overtime, and they would write letters of apologies to their housemates and all that kind of stuff, right? Oh boy, the next day I had all the staff that lined up saying, you don't know what you're doing, Dr. Jacobs. This is gonna just make it dangerous for all of us now that you're not punishing them in the ways that they should be punished. You're just letting them go back and make it right with these projects, right? And so I wrote everybody's name down, what they said, and the next day they got 2 weeks notices, and I hired new people. So, and we created and then we created a program where we got horses, cows, pigs, and all that stuff, and we signed them, and we took all the Coke machines out. We took people off of Ritalin and put them on Ovalcap, which is placebo spelled backwards. We got them into roving exercises, and we then brought in sand paintings of the Navajo story where the two come to the father, where they actually had to do things that are in the sand painting story of this of initiation, which was about war, by the way.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. That's the way when I came into the program, it was a behavioral control program. Cognitive behaviorism, but mainly behaviorism. And, there was 8 to 12 boys, 13 to 18 years old, living in basically a couple of trailers, house trailers, staff coming to try to control, they lived there 24/7 kind of thing. We'd work with their families now and then, but it was also on a ranch. So there were horses, there were cattle, there were all the things of working with animals, and there were some people that were trained to work with animals and young people and so on. My program was to do art with them. And that's how I started teaching art with several of the boys. And then because of the kind of access that they shared through their artwork, which was a much more non-confrontational, why are you doing what you're doing, and da, 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 that non-confrontation, you always do it through the back door. And I think when you rode up on the horse, you had the authority, but you kind of used the horse as a mediator to me. It was something that took their attention. And then as I remember you said, you just said, follow me, and the horse is off. And these guys just falling like they're on a string. Well, art did the same thing. I found I could use the art process to actually be the place where they felt on an equal basis, and they would follow the art. And I taught them how to follow the art. And eventually they started trusting what was coming out, that it actually made sense. It wasn't just emotion. There were more things to understand. The gist of my program was try and move to a healing program, much more like what you did with your boys. And why that's so important is I agree. I was in a conflict zone. It was a battle zone. I appreciate staff having to work under those conditions. No different than I would a teacher having to go in and work with 30 to 40 students in a inner city school, or even just any school. I've been a school teacher as well, so I know. But I want to share a little story that came with the staff, because I was coming in with this new programming, right? And it was hard to get authority. I didn't really have a lot of authority. The director was very supportive of me, but the rest of the staff they were mechanics, and they were farmers, and they were ranchers wanting to work part-time with these boys, because a little extra income. And some of them really cared about the kids. Some, it was a job. And so I'm in this little ranch out in this rural area, and these are rough guys, big, rough, tough guys mostly. There's a few women. And I'm coming city slicker, right? Educated, blah, blah, blah. And yet I came in, and I remember after a few months of working the program, trying to do some training and teaching to the staff, and it was going okay, but you could see they were very resistant, 60, 70% of them. Anyways, there was a party one night at the director's house, and they got drinking. It was after, and I was there, and came to the first party. And after a while, one of the really big, tough mechanic guys, who was one of the care staff, had been there a long time, he just sort of got, snapping at me, right? Because basically he was kind of under my authority while we're on the program for how we do therapy with the kids. And at one point, he just kind of got really challenging. He was drunk, and he grabbed me by the neck of the shirt, and with one arm, he lifted me up. I'm little, 130 pound, 35 pound me, lifted me up against the wall. And this is in front of the staff, and they're just laughing. They just love it. I knew he was serious, but he was playful at the same time. And so what he really was doing, we're talking about the F word here, and we're talking about an extreme case. Not only the kids are blowing up, the staff are blowing up. So this guy was going to take it out on me, and he just put me up on the wall. So if I was trying to be Mr. Tough Guy, bravado, whatever, and would have challenged back in any kind of way, and I certainly had lots of people around to support me, I could have done that scene, that drama, and I didn't. I totally chose to let him do it. I stayed very closely connected, eye to eye, every moment. And I kept a look of delight on toward him the whole time. And at one point he says, I could hurt you, in a big drum. I could hurt you. And I said, no, I wouldn't let you hurt me. And I just kept that quiet, not arguing, not resisting. And I think that is the main thing that I hear in your approach to whether it's taking Pablo out to this potential of death and risk and threat, or whatever the situation might be. If we don't resist it, but we learn from it, and we learn from what it has to teach us coming back to us. So I had to be an open learner with this guy.
Well, what you did.
And that's everything I do with the boys. That's what I do with the boys. You can't argue with them. That's not going to go anywhere.
Well, we reduced takedowns, which you had to report to the state.
Yeah, right.
When there was a physical takedown, you had to report it and describe it. When I arrived, it was 144 per quarter of physical takedowns. We reduced that to 2 per quarter by doing all the things that you're talking about, by bringing in new faculty, new staff who could do what you're saying, in concert with the other kinds of things that we did. Yeah,
it's a combination.
Yeah.
So we can call it a therapeutic approach. We can call it a fearlessness approach. And so I got to use the word fear for the first time because I added something onto it immediately. And this is what I understand in the Indigenous teachings. And in our last talk, I do want to read a little transcript from our last talk 2.5 years ago. I took a little transcript off.
Oh, that'll be interesting.
It's kind of fun to read, I think, for us to
I wonder if I'm going to still agree with it or not.
Yeah, right.
Always changing and being proven wrong or modifying or adding to something, right?
I feel like that too. And so what was interesting is that was what I called the fearlessness approach. And so adding anything onto the word fear, to me, seems to already say that fear is going somewhere. Right? When you just kind of use it on its own, it kind of gets caught in its own static quality, and then you have to kind of work with it, resist it, try to control it. But when you use the word fearlessness, boom, boom, it's already moving. It's already going somewhere, and that seems to fit the virtue.
Yeah, and right now, if I may, so you can play this in 2.5 years, let's add another syllable to the word and call it fearlessnessing.
Beautiful.
Let's move it into a verb. Then we're into what the indigenous language does versus the problems with words like love and fear in the European languages, which are not in motion and not more complicated. So fearlessnessing, it's our new word. We just coined it together.
Yeah, we're going to hear about that right now, November 9th, 2018. Two educators, critical educators, Four Arrows and R. Michael Fisher, began to talk, and at one point in the video near the end, Four Arrows says, "So what is going on today in a Trumpian world and an overall world? It's in Honduras, it's in the Philippines, now it's maybe going to be in Brazil. What is that we're saying now that can actually be useful to seeing fear as a catalyst for practice of a virtue, of understanding and dialoguing about it? Are we suggesting that people start talking more in an authentic way about it and looking at it in terms of the matriarchal? I think we're bringing up so many ways here for other people to start to talk about this. Michael, this is interesting because that's part of what I said. What if we actually label something called fear talks? We need to have fear talks. Notice again, adding a word to fear, right? Carrying it into a process. Four Arrows. I welcome people to talk about all of these topics and tune into it. So I hope they do. Michael. Yeah, to correct. Well, to have this dialogue in schools with children. Say to them, okay, it's time to do fear talks. We designed this curriculum into a spiral, K to post-secondary. Four Arrows jumps in, interrupts as he usually does. I can't think of anything more important. Michael, it's a total practice of one of the most powerful forces that you and I both agree is and may say, fear is uniquely powerful, very powerful. Even to call it an emotion is actually quite a euphemism. Four Arrows, exactly. Four Arrows. I think it could be educationally one of the great counter-hegemonic. Fisher jumps in and interrupts. Yes, counter-hegemonic. Four Arrows. Strategies for counter-hegemonic democracy. Michael. Includes an indigenizing into that curriculum. Includes a fearlessness paradigm. I'm bringing forward, I think, your work is also bringing forward Four Arrows many other ways that are informing a different paradigm. Four Arrows. We talked about the sensitivities regarding the word indigenizing education. And you went through the 4 different sensitivities of problems with people using indigenizing education. He says, but we're all on one sinking boat, he said. Let's look at those generalizations, the pan-Indian common denominators without fear. And you basically say both sides need to go beyond fear. The indigenous and the non-indigenous. You say we got to have the courage to engage it. Michael, so I'll just finish. And Four Arrows, you get the last word. I came up with this term, fearlessnessnizing, as parallel to...
No way. Are you reading that from 2.5 years ago?
I came up with this term, fearlessnessnizing, as parallel to indigenizing. Fearlessnessizing everything, just like indigenizing everything. Fearlessnessizing is drawing from traditions, ways of knowing prior to the point of departure. Four Arrows. There's an advantage to that, right? There's, like in my book on patient communication, I wasn't allowed to use the word hypnosis because of these controversies, sensitivities. The only risk with not using the word indigenous is that we don't continue to support indigenous sovereignty and decolonizing. But in terms of getting to more people in the conversation, without risking one of those slippery slopes, I like the idea, because it gets to the same place. Fearlessnessizing, indigenizing, and in your new movie that I'd like to now switch to talk about a little bit before we close up today. Four Arrows, you put out a movie recently called The Suffering of the Earth, or Earth is Suffering, I believe. And at one point in the 2 minutes, 52 seconds, not a lot of time, what are you going to say to the world? I thought very interesting. Quote, human knowledge must be joined by a fearless trust in the unknowable mysteries of nature. End of quote. So there's a few things for you, my friend.
Well, I mean, I'm embarrassed a little bit that I have not been really using what we coined 2.5 years ago that I thought we just coined about 5 minutes ago. I think of it that way, but I don't recall myself writing about using that word. So this is a good kick in the butt for me, because I really do believe that we can do our best to re-indigenize our language, which means trying to make more verbs out of what we now have as nouns, to make it more difficult to concretize. Well, thank you so much for that. Other than that, though, you and I think we've made a snowball from that hasn't been unpacked. It's pretty consistent.
Yeah, so we've got teachers today. Let's just say we're in an audience for this last part of the video here. You've got this film out, and we've got a group of teachers listening to us right now, right? And I'd like to know how you would address introducing this film to a group of school teachers, public school teachers or whatever. But let's just say general, real general, not even necessarily Indigenous-based education, but just in general. Because I really think one of the things that's so challenging today for school teachers, if I was one and in their footsteps, I know your daughter is a teacher as well, they have so much to deal with on a daily basis with these young people that are in their classrooms. Most of them are in their 20s, most teachers coming out now, 30s maybe. What and how would you introduce that film and the rationale for your design of that film? And I'll put a link. I'll put a link on it.
Just off the top of my head, I would say, yesterday I watched an interview on Democracy Now! Of Raul, who is the famous documentarist who just did the HBO special that came out last week called Exterminating the Brutes, based on a book by that title, Exterminating the Brutes. And in that interview, in this brilliant 4-part series of the history of colonialism, imperialism, and racism, and the horrors of it that are exposed in very graphic ways. Time magazine says it's the most intellectual and difficult thing that was ever put on television. Wow. And they said it must have been a fluke, Time magazine says, because it's so strong. And yet, as they talked, they kept saying, but my outcome for this film was just to make people aware of how we've been doing this for so long and it's still going on, and how ignorant and wrong and horrible it is. And we need to have dialogues to come to find out why. And of course, I'm sitting there biting my tongue, about, well, we kind of know why, and I'm referring to the indigenous worldview being lost and killed. And then it hit me that they have started on the wrong foot with the title, because by just accepting that all of this was because of a superior person looking at someone who they saw as a different color as an animal, that's what brute means, is non-human. there was no criticism in the dialogue with Amy in the interview of saying, well, I chose that title because that is what they did. And instead, it was just accepted. So all the horrors that they exposed, I feel there will be no significant change, because in introducing this film, I'm trying to say it's our nature-based connections. It's learning and participating from and in nature. It's understanding that the ant, the cockroach, the pigeon, the grass growing through the concrete, the bush, the tree, the clouds, the wind, that is the connection that we should be holding on to with one another, in collaboration and in joy and in facing difficult times. And in this 2.5 minutes, that's what I hope a teacher can say. Get into the classroom and start seeing anthropocentrism as poison. And when you catch yourself with the Common Core standards or whatever you're using, and just completely eliminating animals and nature in any form, catch yourself and get the students to start talking about what animals have they learned from, what creatures, what do they feel when they're out in the wind, how do they feel about bushes and trees and ants. In other words, make connections to whatever the subject matter is to the natural world, and you'll be taking a step back into how we live for most of human history.
I think the line you use in the film that was kind of stood out quite nicely is to not keep seeing nature as a resource, but to see these as teachers. It's a very simple notion, right? And if you think of in teacher training in all the colleges, universities, everywhere going on in the world, when we say what makes a teacher, right? I mean, that everybody goes into teaching. What makes a teacher? And you have a course in teacher formation or whatever. You can just see this little line, this simple line, it all of a sudden puts the context of teaching in an entirely new paradigm. And I think what you basically said, that's an ancestral route to teaching. So rather than all the educational psychology, not saying either or, but having it so dominating, so hegemonic about what it means to be a teacher, to get results, and this is, evidence-based teaching practices and on and on. This reversal, it's a kind of reversal, is immediately available. So I think what you and I today, and what we've done in our first Fear Talk, and I encourage viewers to have a look at the first one and then connect it with this one as a sequencing. Perhaps Rose and I will keep doing another series eventually as well, that really we're looking at continuity for us. I don't know, that's the word that comes up for me. Even the notion of verbizing, right? Putting a verb on words, concepts like fear, etc., and then putting them into a verb process. That to me always seems it's a basic principle of continuity.
It's interesting that you say continuity, because in the conversation that I had earlier, the faculty member I was talking with was saying how she has so well coped with all of the challenges that are facing us, because her father traveled and they moved from one place to the other, to the other, to the other. But she said in each place there was a woods. And although the woods were very different, it gave a continuity. She used that word. Of a community in each place, so that she didn't feel leaving one community and going to another. Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah, place-based, cosmologies, right? Place-based epistemologies, ways of knowing and belonging and coming to even develop language from a place, rather than these abstract, imported ways that we often bring to our knowledge. I think that place-based is a really fundamental part of that continuity. And as you say, it's immediately connects us to nature through place. So welcome for today to all of the beings that were with us. And I think if you have a way to ceremony to sort of release those who are with us today back to where they need to go, and to thank them for what they've brought to us today for us, please.
Yes, and thanks to all the people that are listening and thinking. And I got my little Cherokee flute here, and for those who don't know what the Trail of Tears are, they can go research it. But this was a song sung on the Trail of Tears by mothers to their children during existential times like we're in now, that essentially said, and did you see the beautiful art? But did you see the beautiful animals in the clouds? Did you see the dancing grasses? Did you hear the beautiful sounds of the birds? Did you see the colors of the trout when we walked through the brook, etc.? So it's being able to see the world all around. And this is the melody, if you can just imagine.
In that continuity.
In that continuity, yes. Hasta luego, amigo. Cake, awachi, anki.
All the best.